Have you ever, like, slowly, and I guess almost unconsciously, just stopped going to one of your favorite businesses?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think everyone has.
Right. And it's not because of some massive disaster,
Yeah.
You didn't get food poisoning or anything.
Nobody was explicitly rude to you.
Exactly. There wasn't some dramatic confrontation at the cash register,
Yeah.
but over time, you just sort of developed this vague, lingering feeling that, I don't know, it's the same anymore. The magic was just gone.
Yeah, it's a very specific kind of disappointment, isn't it? It's quiet. I mean, you don't write an angry one-star review.
Of course not.
You don't demand to speak to a manager. You just silently fade away and take your routine somewhere else.
Which brings us to today, because our mission for this deep dive is to figure out the exact mechanics behind that quiet fade. We are uncovering the invisible signals that silently dictate human behavior and consumer trust.
And it's a fascinating topic.
It really is. Our source material today is this great piece by Michael Woodruff, and it's titled The Broken Windows Theory of Marketing. And just a quick note on the source. It was written with AI assistance, but the framework, the editorial direction, and the core ideas are entirely the author's own.
Right. And what we'll be examining is how businesses accidentally broadcast neglect to you, the consumer.
Which they do constantly.
They really do. We'll look at the historical and psychological reasons why this phenomenon accelerated so drastically over the last few years. And perhaps most importantly, how you can begin spotting these invisible signals in the physical world around you.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand modern business failures, we actually have to take a quick detour back to 1982.
Which seems like a leap, but it makes sense.
Right. We need to look at a concept that was originally meant for city streets and police precincts and apply it to, like, your local coffee shop or hardware store.
Yeah, the phrase broken windows.
Exactly. It comes from a highly influential 1982 essay in The Atlantic. It was by a political scientist named James Q. Wilson and a criminologist named George L. Kelling.
And their core argument there centered around visible disorder. The theory proposes that if, say, a single window in a building is broken and just left unrepaired, it sends this powerful, immediate psychological signal to the surrounding community.
It's like a broadcast.
It is. It communicates that standards simply do not matter here. There is no oversight.
Wow, yeah.
And when a physical environment feels abandoned, the people walking through it begin to actually alter their behavior to match that perceived lack of standards.
That is wild. Well, but I mean, it makes sense.
Right. And while the theory has certainly been debated over the decades in the strict context of criminal justice as a metaphor for how human beings unconsciously read environments, it is remarkably accurate.
And we read commercial environments exactly the same way. I mean, the article points out that broken windows in a business setting are incredibly dangerous, mostly because they're usually invisible to the people who actually work there.
Because they just see it every day.
Right. They just become normalized over time. So it's, the local bakery with weird, inconsistent hours that seem to change week to week.
Oh, I hate that.
Me too.
Mhm.
Or it's a permanent piece of printer paper taped to the glass that just says, closing early today, like every day.
Or a revolving door of staff where you never see the same face twice.
Yeah, or a Facebook page that quietly hasn't posted a single update in, like, 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
It honestly reminds me of visiting a friend's house and noticing dead houseplants sitting in the corners of every room.
Oh, that captures the subtle nature of it perfectly.
Right. Because you don't sit on their couch and consciously formulate the thought, this person is fundamentally neglectful.
No, but your brain is this incredibly efficient machine, and it's constantly scanning your environment for anomalies.
Always looking for what's wrong.
Exactly. It unconsciously registers that lack of care. The dead leaves are just a data point. And so your baseline trust in their ability to manage their environment it springs a leak.
And trust leaking is just catastrophic for commerce. I mean, no single one of those things, like a slightly outdated Google listing or an overflowing trash can by the front door, none of that will bankrupt a business on a Tuesday.
No, of course not. But they create a quiet, cumulative impression.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is the psychological mechanism at play. Because human beings, we crave predictability.
We really do.
When a business operates with high standards, it requires zero cognitive effort from the consumer. You walk in, you know what to expect, and you get it.
Smooth sailing.
Right. But when you encounter those small inconsistencies, the taped up sign, the empty shelves, your brain suddenly has to work harder.
It introduces friction.
It introduces friction. The customer's brain is constantly quietly asking, is anyone actually paying attention here? And once that question enters the consumer's mind, the inherent trust of the transaction is totally compromised.
Okay, that cumulative impression of neglect makes total sense in a vacuum. But business owners aren't stupid.
Right.
Nobody signs a commercial lease and opens a store hoping to slowly alienate their customer base through 1,000 tiny cuts.
Yeah.
Something systemic has to be causing these blind spots, right?
Absolutely. And to understand the modern prevalence of this, we really have to look at the recent historical context. We have to look at a period of sheer survival mode.
The pandemic.
Yeah, the article emphasizes that a vast majority of these commercial broken windows were not born out of laziness or apathy. They were born out of the massive shock to the global system in 2020.
It's a total reset.
Entire industries literally had to hit pause and ask fundamental questions about what it even meant to be an essential operation.
Right. Think back to the absolute free fall of April 2020. Millions of people lost their jobs practically overnight. We saw the highest spike in U.S. unemployment since the Great Depression. It hit, what, 14.7%?
Yes, 14.7%, just staggering.
And 77% of public schools moved to online distance learning. Manufacturers had to completely sever and rewire their supply chains. Offices emptied out, and service businesses were forced to radically trim their hours just to comply with local ordinances.
It was an era defined by necessary corner cutting. I mean, owners were slashing budgets, reducing menus, and limiting their hours of operations simply to keep the lights on.
And at the time, customers were incredibly accommodating.
They were. Everyone was navigating the exact same global chaos.
But hold on, we all gave a tremendous amount of grace during the chaos of 2020 and 2021. But isn't there a statute of limitations on that?
That's a great question.
I mean, at what point do customers stop grading a business on a pandemic curve? When does a temporary survival shortcut just become a permanent bad habit?
That is the exact trap the article identifies. The mindset of an exhausted owner becomes, I'll get to it when things settle down.
Right.
But for a small business owner doing their own payroll, managing inventory, and covering shifts for sick employees, that magical moment of free time never actually arrived.
It just doesn't exist.
Exactly. The pandemic created the initial shortcuts, but chronic exhaustion kept them alive. Those temporary survival defaults never got reversed.
Oh, wow.
So to the customer walking in the door today, those taped up signs and reduced hours don't look like a pandemic hangover. They just look like the actual identity of the business.
So what does this all mean when we move away from purely logistical failures? Because we've been dissecting operational neglect, short staffing, messy storefronts, bad hours.
So cyclical stuff, yeah.
Right, but the article shifts into territory that feels much more profound. It talks about emotional and cultural neglect. Because a broken window isn't always a physical task you forgot to check off a clipboard. Sometimes it's the slow, deliberate removal of the magic from an experience.
Yeah, this is where the broken windows theory scales up in a very sobering way, because we are talking about institutions that were famous for a specific tradition, right? A signature element, or just a deeply ingrained atmosphere that people genuinely cherished.
The vibe.
The vibe. And then, usually in the name of efficiency or cost cutting, those familiar pieces are systematically stripped away.
Okay, the article uses an example that hits right in the childhood nostalgia for me. Pizza Hut.
Oh, yes. The classic Pizza Hut.
If you grew up in a certain era, Pizza Hut wasn't just a fast food transaction where someone handed you a cardboard box. It was a destination.
It was a Friday night event.
Exactly. You walked into that distinct building with the red roof. You had the dim, moody lighting, the red checkered tablecloths, those stained glass lamps overhead.
Oh, I remember those lamps.
Right. Someone brought out a heavy pitcher of beer or soda. You had your family packed into a booth, and maybe you played a tabletop arcade game while you waited.
You weren't just acquiring calories, you were participating in a localized event.
Yes. But over time, the brand shifted heavily towards speed, delivery, and operational efficiency. They sterilized the dining rooms. They effectively removed the fun.
And this isn't just 90s nostalgia clouding our judgment either. The financial data firmly backs it up.
Wait, really? What does the data say?
Well, Yum Brands is actively shrinking Pizza Hut's physical footprint. The global unit count fell from 20,225 at the end of 2024 to 19,974 at the end of 2025.
Wow, there's a big drop.
And they expect about 250 U.S. closures in the first half of 2026 alone?
Jeez.
Maintaining that specific dining vibe requires real estate, specialized staffing, and higher overhead. And that simply doesn't align with a modern corporate push for hyperefficiency.
But the customer feels that shift in their bones. I mean, they don't walk out of a modernized, sterile dining room thinking about Yum Brand's corporate overhead strategy.
Definitely not.
They walk out with one quiet, fatal sentence. It's just not the same anymore.
Exactly.
It also reminds me of a relationship where neither person did anything terribly legally wrong to the other, but you just stopped going on date nights to save money.
Oh, that's a brilliant analogy.
Right, you stopped asking about each other's days to save time. The logistics of the relationship are still technically functioning. The rent is being paid, but the underlying vibe is totally dead.
The logistics work, but the vibe is dead. That is a crucial distinction. And the author expands on this by showing how this fading of shared culture acts as a massive broken window for entire municipalities.
Entire towns.
Yeah, think about the invisible architecture of a town. When a community shares rituals and common expectations, people maintain their physical spaces without even thinking about it. They feel a sense of ownership.
But when that shared culture fades, you trigger a silent domino effect.
Exactly.
The article points specifically to local information ecosystems, like when a local newspaper shrinks to a fraction of its size or gets bought by a hedge fund, the town loses its central bulletin board.
Right.
Or when a regional radio station gets absorbed by a national conglomerate and stops broadcasting local voices, the town loses its shared frequency. When the library has to slash its weekend programming, a vital gathering space just evaporates.
And this raises an important question about something sociologists call social capital.
Social capital.
Yeah, it's the invisible glue of a community, the networks of relationships, the trust, the shared identity that allows a society to function effectively. Fading local information sources, like the ones you just mentioned, act as the ultimate broken window for a town's social fabric.
That makes total sense.
Without them, fewer people gather, fewer people share a common reality, and civic organizations immediately feel the pinch. Volunteer pools dry up, finding sponsorships for the Little League team gets exponentially harder.
And the town slowly hemorrhages that social capital until one day, the longtime local festival gets, quote, paused this year, and it simply never returns.
The silent broken window of a canceled parade.
It's chilling when you realize how a sterile restaurant and a shrinking local paper are driven by the exact same mechanism.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Oh.
If the loss of a specific vibe or the cancellation of a local event signals deep neglect, what about the very first thing a customer looks at before they even decide to cross the threshold of a business?
The price tag.
The price tag.
Yeah, price is arguably the loudest, most aggressive signal a business can send, because a price point does not merely dictate your profit margin. It acts as a highly specific magnet for consumer expectations.
The article illustrates this with an HVAC company.
Right, the $39 tune-up.
Exactly. Imagine an HVAC company puts out a massive advertising blitz for a $39 winter tune-up. That specific, rock-bottom price point is going to attract a consumer who is hunting for the absolute cheapest, fastest fix available in the market.
And the author is careful to note that this isn't inherently evil, but it initiates a fundamentally different relationship.
Yeah, because that bargain-hunting customer is, by definition, less loyal.
Highly comparison-driven.
Right. They will view every recommendation from the technician with suspicion, assuming it's a scam to upsell them, and they will bounce to a competitor the second your price goes up by $5.
Contrast that dynamic with an HVAC company that confidently charges its full premium rate for a thorough, unhurried home inspection.
A totally different vibe.
Exactly. That higher price point attracts a consumer who is fundamentally buying trust. They are buying reliability and peace of mind. They want to avoid the nightmare of their furnace dying in the middle of January.
Nobody wants that.
Right. And they want to feel genuinely taken care of by a credentialed professional. Higher prices don't magically attract morally superior people, but they attract a totally different psychological posture.
Yeah, and those expectations dictate the tone of the conversations your staff has, the tolerance your customers have for unexpected delays, and ultimately the long-term reputation of the business in the community. Which makes me want to look at the dark side of that dynamic.
Okay, let's hear it.
If a rock-bottom price attracts a highly critical, suspicious customer who treats your specialized trade like a cheap commodity, Does offering a massive, desperate discount actually function as a self-inflicted broken window?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, are you accidentally broadcasting to the market that your own service simply isn't worth loyalty?
It acts as an incredibly destructive signal. When you drastically discount your core offering, you are explicitly telling the market, we don't truly believe this is worth the premium, and you shouldn't either.
Wow. Yeah, that's harsh but true.
It establishes a baseline expectation of cheapness that is nearly impossible to reverse. You train your customer base to only care about the coupon, effectively stripping away any of the magic, trust, or relationship building we talked about earlier. You are actively degrading your own social capital.
Because the price dictates the customer culture you create.
Precisely.
But we have spent a lot of time looking at the abyss today.
We really have.
We've traced how physical neglect, chronic pandemic exhaustion, the deliberate sterilization of an experience, the fading of civic culture, and even desperate pricing models all function as broken windows.
It's a lot.
So how do we actually fix this? Because the article doesn't leave us stranded in the dark.
No, it doesn't.
The key insight isn't just about grabbing a hammer and repairing a physical crack in the glass. It's about a concept the author calls adding life.
And this is the deeply encouraging pivot of the framework. Because broken windows are reversible.
Thank goodness.
Right. The antidote to an environment that feels abandoned is to make human life and intentional care highly visible within it. Customers possess an innate magnetic response to visible life.
The author gives a fantastic physical example of this. The Northwest Arkansas Mall in Fayetteville.
Yeah, I love this example.
If you walk the concourse there, you can certainly see the visible signs of retail struggle.
Oh.
I mean, there are empty storefronts where major brands used to be.
Which normally signals the end.
Right. But you also see a brilliant countermove. The mall management is actively utilizing the empty space, rather than letting it sit there like a dark, depressing tomb.
Adding life.
Adding life. They've invited in local art exhibits where patrons can actually purchase pieces. They've curated their food court to feel like a mini-world tour of diverse local cuisines, rather than just the exact same predictable, tired lineup of national fast food chains you see at every interstate exit.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the contrast between passive space and active space is vital.
Say more about that.
Well, empty, dark retail space loudly broadcasts decline. It is an evolutionary signal that says, resources are scarce here, people are fleeing.
Right away.
Exactly. But active space, even if it is highly unconventional, like putting an indie art gallery in a former shoe store, broadcasts resilience and adaptation. It signals to the consumer's brain, we are still here, we are actively trying, and this space is safe to invest your time in.
And then there's the concept of density, which the author illustrates using downtown Van Buren.
Ah, yes.
This is presented as the prime example of what alive truly looks like on a main street. A healthy downtown isn't just one massive monolithic anchor store carrying the economic weight of the whole town.
No, that's too fragile.
It's about what the author calls the stack. It is a diverse ecosystem of shops, boutiques, and local businesses packed physically close enough together that human beings naturally drift from one doorway to the next.
The natural drift is key.
You have places dripping with unique personality, like Iron Horse Records, the Box Arcade, and Monsters on Main, all woven together in tight proximity. People aren't just driving there to run a sterile errand. They park their cars, they walk, and they linger. Proximity breeds accidental discovery.
And that physical clustering is critical because it creates a rhythm of foot traffic.
Yeah.
And speaking of rhythm, the intentional scheduling of events is what sustains that human life over the long term.
Stumps are huge.
Right. Downtown Van Buren hosts the Downtown Junk Fest, Holiday in Whoville, and the Old Timers Day Steampunk Festival.
Steampunk Festival, I love that.
Yeah. And these are not just random excuses to throw a party. They serve a deep structural purpose. They prevent the downtown from being entirely dependent on a single good retail weekend or a fleeting tourist season.
They give people a tangible, recurring reason to show up.
Exactly.
And the author leaves us with an incredibly actionable, empowering piece of advice. Fix one window a week, and your reputation will change faster than your advertising ever could.
That is such a powerful takeaway.
It really is.
Yeah.
You don't need to secure a $1 million small business loan for a massive rebrand. You just need to walk through your own front door with fresh eyes and fix one small signal of neglect at a time.
Just one at a time.
And it's worth mentioning that Michael Woodruff offers a specific walkthrough checkup of businesses, websites, and messaging to help owners spot these invisible blind spots. If you want a fresh set of eyes to see what is quietly helping or hurting your own operation, you can reach him directly at michael@woodruffmedia.com.
It all comes down to the deliberate building of routines. If you give people a compelling, lively, and predictable reason to visit, they will naturally build their personal routines around your business or your downtown corridor.
And routines repair reputations.
They do. When the lights are bright, when the hours are reliably consistent, when the physical experience actually has a pulse, people can feel that energy. It demands far less cognitive load, and trust naturally follows.
So, to synthesize this entire journey for you, broken windows are essentially just normalized patterns of neglect. They almost always start as innocent, necessary survival shortcuts during a crisis, but over time, they solidify into permanent habits.
And then the trouble begins.
Right. They strip away the magic of a customer experience, they dictate the exact type of consumer culture you attract, and they quietly, efficiently erode trust.
But the incredible news is that they can be reversed.
Yes. Not just by putting a fresh coat of paint on a wall, but by deliberately, methodically injecting human life and visible care back into a space. The next time you walk into a building, look for those signals. Look for the broken windows.
Once you understand this framework, it completely changes the way you view the commerce happening all around you. You start realizing just how much intense psychological communication is occurring without a single word ever being spoken.
It really is a completely different lens on the world. Well, we want to leave you with one final, slightly more provocative thought before we go today.
Oh, this is a good one.
We spent this entire deep dive analyzing how physical environments, commercial businesses, and entire towns accidentally signal neglect. But what about our own lives?
How?
I know, right? What are your personal broken windows? Is it a perpetually cluttered email inbox that you stare at every morning? An unreturned text message to an old friend that has been sitting there for 3 weeks?
Or a neglected hobby.
Yeah, a neglected hobby that used to bring you immense joy, but the gear is just gathering dust in the garage. What are the small, unattended cracks in your own daily routine that are silently signaling, both to yourself and the people who depend on you, that your own internal standards are slipping?
It's a tough question to answer.
It is. Think back to that vague, lingering feeling of a business that just isn't the same anymore. Are you absolutely sure you aren't sending that exact same signal to yourself? Something to think about? Something to think about? Something to think about?